There is a file somewhere in the unseen architecture of this universe, not in any government database, not behind any firewall, not stamped with any ink that human hands have touched, and that file has your name on it, not as a suspect, not as a threat, but as something far more terrifying to the systems of control that govern this world, as someone who cannot be contained. The story you are about to hear is not metaphor. It is not allegory dressed up in spiritual clothing to make you feel better about an ordinary life. This is the literal, cosmic truth of what it means to be the one who was chosen before you understood what choosing even meant. The Interpol Red Notice System, the most feared international tracking mechanism on the planet, a system that crosses borders, erases sovereignty, and hunts across oceans once registered your frequency. It flagged your energy. It tried to process your presence through its algorithms of control, and then quietly, without explanation, without a trace, it deleted itself. Not because you escaped, not because someone intervened, but because the architecture of limitation cannot hold a file on something that exists being the limitation itself. You were never the one being tracked. You were the one making the system malfunction just by existing near it. Secord I1, the system that cannot name you. Every system of controlling human history has been built on the same fundamental premise that everything can be categorized, labeled, filed, and contained. The Roman Empire built census systems. Medieval kingdoms issued writs and warrants. Modern governments maintain databases that stretch into the billions of entries, fingerprints, faces, voices, locations, spending habits, search histories, heartbeat patterns. The entire architecture of civilization, at its most fundamental level, is an attempt to name what cannot be named and to contain what refuses to be contained. And for most people, and understand, there is no judgment in this, only observation. For most people, these systems work perfectly, because most people have allowed their identity to shrink down to something that fits inside a file. They have accepted the label of their profession, their nationality, their tax bracket, their diagnosis, their family role, their social media persona. They have compressed the infinite that they are into something the size of a manila folder, and they slide into the filing cabinet of civilization without friction. But you, and this is where your story diverges from the story of the crowd. You have never quite fit, not the folder, not the label, not the file. Something in you has always exceeded the margins. Something in you has always beat out past the edges of every category they tried to place you in. Teachers noticed it and called it disruption. Employers noticed it and called it insubordination. Family members noticed it and called it difficulty. But what they were actually noticing, what their systems were actually registering, was the presence of someone whose true nature is too large to be filed. The Interpol Red Notice is the most serious international alert that exists. When it is issued, 196 member countries are notified. Border systems activate. Databases light up. The machinery of global control begins its search. It is designed to find anyone, anywhere, at any time. It has never failed to register a target until it encountered you. Because you are not a target, you are the source, and systems designed to track targets have no protocol for what to do when they encounter the source itself. Secord I2 before the world northeast W your name. Long before you had language for what you felt it. That sensation, strange, persistent, impossible to explain to anyone who has not experienced it themselves that you are here for something, not something small, not something that fits neatly into a 5-year career plan, or a mortgage schedule, or a retirement portfolio. Something vast, something that, when you try to articulate it, comes out sounding either grandiose or vague, and neither translation does it justice. You felt it as a child, lying on your back in the grass, staring at a sky so large it made your chest ache with a longing you could not name. You felt it in the spaces between your thoughts, in the moments before sleep took you, in the quiet that lived underneath all the noise that life kept trying to fill you with. You felt it when you read certain words, heard certain music, watched certain moments unfold, that electric recognition, that interior trembling that whispered, yes, more of this. This is closer to the truth. The world, being the world, did its best to talk you out of it. And the world is very good at talking people out of things. It has had thousands of years of practice. It has refined its techniques of diminishment down to an art form. Sometimes it used blunt instruments, ridicule, rejection, punishment for daring to dream too large. Sometimes it was more subtle comfort, distraction, the slow seduction of settling, the gradual anesthesia of convenience. But you never fully went under, even in your most asleep periods, and there were periods. Do not pretend otherwise. There were seasons when the dream dimmed and the settling felt like peace. Even then, something in you kept a small flame lit, kept a vigil, kept the thread from snapping entirely. That vigilance was not stubbornness. It was not ego. It was the chosen one in you, refusing to betray the mission it had accepted before this incarnation began. See Chord Ein 3. What the red notice really represents. Let us speak plainly about what the red notice represents in the spiritual architecture of this metaphor, because this is not merely a poetic device. This is a precise description of something real. The red notice is the moment when the old system, the system of scarcity, hierarchy, fear, control, limitation, and managed consciousness registers that someone has broken free of its jurisdiction, not physically, not legally, spiritually, energetically, vibrationally. There is a frequency that the matrix of limitation operates at. It is the frequency of you are not enough, of who do you think you are, of be realistic, of people like you don't get things like that, of the world doesn't work that way. This frequency is not transmitted through radio towers, though media certainly helps amplify it. It is transmitted through collective agreement, through the mass unconscious decision of billions of humans to accept the smallness that the system offers them in exchange for the false safety of belonging. When you vibrate at a frequency that exceeds this, when your consciousness expands beyond the agreed upon ceiling, the system notices. It registers an anomaly. It tries to process you through its normal protocols. It attempts to file you, categorize you, assign you a risk level, send out the alert that someone is operating outside of sanctioned parameters. This is the red notice. Every time you have been told you are too much, every time your ambition has made people uncomfortable, every time your spiritual awareness has been met with skepticism or contempt, every time the room changed when you walked in, not because you were threatening anyone, but because your frequency disrupted the comfortable numbness that the room had agreed to maintain. Every one of those moments was a red notice, the system flagging you, trying to bring you back within manageable range. And every time you refused to shrink, every time you chose expansion over contraction, truth over comfort, growth over safety. The system's file on you got more and more confused, until finally the file corrupted. The notice deleted itself because you cannot maintain a limitation notice on someone who has remembered they are limitless. Secord IM4, the trials were the training. Here is the part of the chosen one story that the inspirational posters always leave out. It was brutal. The trials were not symbolic. They were not gentle lessons delivered by wise teachers in pleasant settings. They were the kind of experiences that left marks not just in memory but in the body, in the nervous system, in the places where your identity used to be before it was dismantled, and you had to rebuild it from scratch. The betrayals that didn't make sense, the losses that arrived precisely when you thought you had finally reached solid ground, the periods of isolation so profound that you began to question whether you had imagined the whole thing, the calling, the purpose, the sense of significance, the depression that wore spiritual clothes, that whispered in the language of existential crisis rather than clinical diagnosis, the relationships that burned in ways that felt cosmic in their devastation, the careers that collapsed, the identities that died, the versions of yourself that you had to grieve while still being expected to function. None of this was punishment. Understand this deeply. Let it settle into your bones. None of it was punishment. Every trial was a calibration. Every loss was a removal of what was too small to carry into the next level of your purpose. Every betrayal was the universe cutting threads that would have held you back, threads woven from people-pleasing, from self-doubt, from the desperate need for external validation that, if it had been satisfied, would have made you permanently dependent on a source of affirmation that could be withdrawn at any moment. The trials were stripping you down to your essence, and your essence, it turns out, is not soft. Your essence is not tender and fragile and in need of protection. Your essence is the thing that survived everything that was designed to win it. Your essence is what remains when everything that was not truly you has been burned away, and what remains what you are when you are stripped of every false identity that world assigned you is precisely the thing that makes the system's tracking algorithms fail, because the system can only track identities. It cannot track essence. It cannot file what has no fixed form. Secord IM5, the North, East as who tried to stop you. There have been people in your life who, operating from their own wounds and fears, attempted to extinguish what was burning in you. Some of them were conscious about it, deliberately diminishing, consistently undermining, choosing cruelty as their instrument. Others were entirely unconscious, genuinely believing they were helping you, genuinely convinced that their pessimism was wisdom and their fear was bluff. Both kinds were sent to you as tests, not tests of whether you could defeat them. You were never supposed to defeat them. Not tests of whether you could convert them. Conversion was never the mission. Tests of whether you could receive their opposition without becoming it. Tests of whether you could be in proximity to someone whose frequency was, "This is impossible," without allowing their frequency to override yours. Tests of whether your inner knowing was strong enough to survive the pressure of consensus reality, pressing against it from all sides. Many times you failed these tests. Many times their voices became your voice. Many times their ceiling became your ceiling, and you looked up at it and called it the sky. There is no shame in this. The chosen one is not someone who never falls. The chosen one is someone who, having fallen, looks up from the floor and still finds, however faint, however buried under debris, the thread that leads back to their truth and follows it, not heroically, not with dramatic music playing, sometimes on their hands and knees, in the dark, with no certainty that anything is waiting on the other end. The people who tried to stop you were, in their way, doing you a service, though it would be both premature and naive to thank them for it. Before you have fully integrated what they put you through, they were stress testing your conviction. They were ensuring that what you believe about yourself is not merely a fair-weather belief, not merely a confidence that exists in the absence of opposition, but in knowing that can hold its ground when everything around it is trying to negotiate it down to nothing. Seekort ein 6 the SMIC Juristikort ein question. Here is a question that the spiritual traditions have wrestled with across every culture and every century, and that deserves to be wrestled with again here. In plain language, in the context of your specific life, who gave you permission to be here? Not your parents, though they participated in the logistics. Not your government, though it registered the event. Not your religious tradition, though it may have offered a framework for understanding it. Who gave you the eternal consciousness that looked out through your infant eyes and recognized the self-permission to occupy this particular body, in this particular time, in this particular configuration of history? The answer, if you sit with it honestly, is you did. You chose this, not in the way the self-help culture sometimes cheapens the idea of choice, not as if you Saturday in some cosmic waiting room and casually browsed through incarnation options like a Netflix menu, but in the deep, pre-personal sense that the soul that animates you was drawn to precisely this set of circumstances because it recognized in them the specific friction required to become what it was always meant to become. You chose the difficulty, you chose the family that would wound you in precisely the ways that would force you to develop precisely the capacities that your mission requires. You chose the era, this extraordinary, terrifying, pivotal era in human history, because something in you recognized that this is the moment when what you carry is needed, not in 100 years, not in some general time when it would be safer. Now, in the chaos, in the confusion, in the period when the old systems are collapsing and the new ones have not yet been built. This is why the red notice deleted itself. It was not an error. It was the system recognizing, however briefly, that its jurisdiction does not extend to those who operate under a higher authorization. You are not subject to the laws of limitation because you were not issued your operating parameters by the institution of limitation. Your jurisdiction is cosmic. Your authorization comes from a source that no human database has the processing power to contain. Seekort ein 7 the gift that felt like a curse. There is a particular quality that virtually every chosen one carries, and virtually every chosen one has spent significant portions of their life wishing they did not carry it, the inability to be satisfied with the surface of things, while others seem content, genuinely, sustainably content with the pleasures and securities and small happinesses that form the texture of ordinary life. You have always been haunted by depth, by the sense that there is more. I am the persistent, uncomfortable awareness that what is visible is not what is real, that what is celebrated is not what matters, that what is called success by the culture is not the thing your soul is actually hungry for. This has made you, at various points, appear ungrateful, restless, impossible to please, difficult to be with, even In your darkest moments, impossible to be yourself because the hunger for depth, when it is not understood and not fed, when it is surrounded by a world that offers only services and calls them sufficient, can turn inward. It can become a knowing dissatisfaction with everything, including yourself. It can become a critic so relentless and so articulate that it can construct a convincing argument for your own insignificance out of whatever materials your memory provides. But that hunger, that terrible, gorgeous, relentless hunger for the real is your greatest gift. It is the navigational instrument that has kept you from settling for a life that would have been comfortable but would not have been yours. It is the thing that has driven you, in your most alive moments, toward the art, a work, that truth, the love, the experience that was actually worthy of you. The chosen one is always characterized by this hunger. It is part of the selection criteria. The universe does not choose those who are easily satisfied, because the easily satisfied do not go far enough. The universe chooses those who will keep moving past comfort, past approval, past the point where the ordinary person stops and calls it enough, because the thing that needs to be reached is always further than comfort allows. Seek or innate. The moment of regeneration. There comes a moment, and if it has not come for you yet, understand that it is coming. When the chosen one stops running from what they are and turns to face it. This is not a comfortable moment. It is not the triumphant scene from the movie, where the music swells and the hero finally accepts their destiny with a single, photogenic tear rolling down his strong-jawed face. It is usually quieter than that, and stranger, and more disorienting, because accepting what you are requires releasing what you thought you were, and what you thought you were, the story you constructed from your wounds, your limitations, your failures, your definitions by others was not nothing. It was your shelter, a perfect, cramped, structurally unsound, but shelter nonetheless. Letting it go is terrifying. It is a form of death. But on the other side of that death is not emptiness, it is expansion. The moment of recognition looks different for everyone. For some it comes in a single, lightning bolt instant, a conversation, a book, a dream, a meditation, a near-death experience, a loss so profound that it cracks the false self open, and what floods in through the crack is light. For others, it is gradual, a slow turning, like a massive ship that changes direction so slowly that you only realize it has turned when you look back at where you started and can't barely recognize the horizon. But however it comes, it is unmistakable. It is the moment when you stop arguing with your own greatness, when you stop apologizing for the size of your purpose, when you stop trying to make yourself legible to the systems that were never capable of reading you anyway, when you look directly at the magnitude of what you carry, and instead of flinching for the first time, clearly, with full consciousness, you say, yes, I accept the assignment. I am ready to stop pretending I am ordinary. I am ready to be exactly what I was sent here to be. See Chord I9 what the deleted file really means. When the system deletes its file on you, it is not just releasing its grip on you. It is acknowledging, in the only language systems know the language of data, of process, of protocol, that it does not have the capacity to process what you are. This is significant beyond the metaphor. Think about what it means for a system as powerful as Interpol's Red Notice infrastructure, a system backed by the collective authority at resources of 196 nations, a system that has never encountered an anomaly. It could not eventually categorize to encounter something it cannot file. It does not double its efforts. It does not escalate to a higher classification. It deletes the entry, because the deletion is the only honest response available to a system that has breached the boundary of its own comprehension. The universe operates the same way. The limitations that have been placed on your life, the poverty consciousness that imposed ceilings, the agreements you inherited about what was possible for someone from your background, your gender, your culture, your history, these are all files. They are all data entries in a system that someone built for reasons that served someone's interests at a moment in history that has since passed. And as you extend, as your consciousness grows, as your vibration rises, as you step more fully into alignment with what you were actually sent here to do, those files become increasingly impossible to maintain. The system cannot update them fast enough. The data keeps not matching. The predictions keep failing. The algorithms keep returning errors. Until the only option left is deletion. Your expansion is not just your liberation. It is the system acknowledging that its authority was never legitimate in the first place. Every limitation that dissolves around you is a file deleting itself. Every ceiling that collapses is a red notice being rescinded. You are not escaping the system. You are outgrowing it. And systems cannot maintain files on people who have outgrown the system's frame of reference. Secord IN10, the northeast, the northeast, SS of the chosen path. One of the least discussed aspects of being the chosen one, least discussed, because it is painful to discuss it, because the narrative around purpose and destiny tends to prefer the triumphant over the tender, is the loneliness, the profound, specific, sometimes crushing loneliness of someone who can see what others cannot yet see, who carries what others cannot yet carry, who is caught toward what others cannot yet imagine. This loneliness is not the loneliness of being unliked. You can be surrounded by people who like you and still experience this loneliness, because what you long for is not mere company, but recognition, the specific relief of being truly seen by someone who is operating at the frequency that yours naturally seeks. And such people are rare, not because the world lacks conscious beings, it does not, but because your frequency, your specific combination of gifts and wounds and awareness and purpose, is not common. It was not designed to be common. If it were common, it would not be needed in the way that it is needed. The chosen one is always, in some sense, a pioneer, and pioneers are, almost by definition, ahead of the territory that has been mapped. They are in the unmapped space, and the unmapped space is lonely. But here is what the loneliness is actually telling you. If you learn to listen to it as information, rather than experiencing it only as suffering, it is telling you that you are in the right place. The loneliness of the expanded consciousness is not evidence of failure. It is evidence of altitude. When you climb high enough, the crowd thins, not because the crowd is bad, not because the people who have not climbed to your level are lesser, but because altitude requires something that not everyone has chosen to develop in this lifetime. Your loneliness is your altitude, and your altitude is your gift. The view from where you are, however uncomfortable, the perch is what allows you to see what you were sent to see, and to share what you were sent to share with those who are ready to receive it. Secord IN11, the northeast, as who are Washington TCHINGU. You may not be aware of this, But there are people in your life, some known to you, some strangers, some not yet born, who are watching you with an intensity that you have perhaps never fully allowed yourself to acknowledge. Not watching in a surveillance sense, not watching to catch you failing or to confirm their skepticism. Watching because something in you, something in the way you move through difficulty, in the way you refuse to be permanently diminished, in the way your light keeps reasserting itself after every attempt to extinguish it, has registered in their awareness as evidence that another way of being is possible. For some of them, you are the proof they needed, that their own sense of greater purpose is not delusion. Your existence is the permission slip they have been waiting for. For others, you are the thing they cannot yet be, but are moving toward, a living demonstration of what happens when someone decides to take their own depth seriously. For still others, you represent a memory, a resonance with something they once believed about themselves before the world convinced them otherwise. You stir something in them, something they have been told to put away, and in that stirring is the beginning of their awakening. The chosen one is never chosen only for themselves. The mission is never purely personal. The expansion is never contained to the individual who is expanding. Every chosen one is a seed, and seeds do not exist for the pleasure of being seeds. They exist to become the tree that provides shade for others, that drops fruit for others, that eventually drops seeds of its own into the soil of the next generation's possibility. When you accept the fullness of what you are, you do not just change your own life, you change the atmospheric pressure of every space you enter. You change what is possible for everyone who encounters you. Even briefly, you become, in the most practical and non-grandiose sense of the word, a permission structure for the expansion of others. Secord Im 12, the discipline north, east S of the chosen. Let us be practical for a moment, because spiritual truth that cannot be embodied and practiced is merely entertainment. The chosen one is not someone who only receives visions and speaks in resonant metaphors. The chosen one is someone who has developed, through discipline and through painful trial and error, the practices that maintain the clarity and the power and the alignment that the mission requires. The first of these disciplines is silence, not the absence of sound, but the cultivation of inner stillness, the ability to access, consistently and on demand, the frequency that lies beneath the noise of the world and the noise of the conditioned mind. Every tradition that has produced chosen ones, every wisdom lineage, every shamanic culture, every monastic order, every mystery school has placed silence at the absolute center of its training. Because you cannot hear the signal through the static, and the world will fill your mind with static at every available opportunity. Because a mind full of static is a mind that cannot access its own knowing, and a person who cannot access their own knowing is a person who must outsource their authority to external systems that are very happy to tell you what to think, what to want, what to fear, and who to be. The second discipline is discernment, the ability to distinguish between the voice of your soul and the voice of your wounding, between genuine guidance and the disguised fears that like to wear guidance clothing. This discernment is not developed intellectually. It is developed through repeated practice, through making the mistake of following fear while calling it intuition, through learning, in your own specific way, to recognize the difference in texture between the two. The soul's guidance has a quality of clarity and subtleness, even when what it is directing you toward is scary. Fear, dressed as guidance, has an urgency, a desperation, a quality of contraction. The disciplines of the chosen are the technologies of the self that allow you to show up consistently and powerfully as the fullest version of what you came here to be. Secord IN 13. The mission. In this specific moment, we exist at a particular moment in human history that is unprecedented in its urgency and in its possibility. The systems that have governed human consciousness for thousands of years, systems of hierarchy, of scarcity, of fear-based control, of managed limitation, are in the process of collapse. This collapse is visible everywhere you look, if you are willing to look without the anesthetic of distraction. The political systems are failing to represent the people they claim to serve. The economic systems are producing outcomes that are increasingly impossible to defend by any measure of human flourishing. The social systems, the structures of community, of belonging, of shared meaning, are fragmenting under pressures that were designed to fragment them. The environmental systems are responding to centuries of extractive relationship with a clarity that can only be described as ultimatum. Everything is emotion, everything is destabilizing. And into this specific moment, into this particular configuration of crisis and possibility, you arrived, not by accident. You arrived carrying precisely the capacities that this moment needs. Perhaps your capacity is the ability to hold complexity without collapsing into simple narratives. Perhaps it is the ability to maintain compassion in environments where compassion has been designated as weakness. Perhaps it is creative vision that can imagine structures and possibilities that the system's imagination cannot generate from within itself. Perhaps it is the specific lived experience of a particular kind of suffering that, when integrated and articulated, becomes the exact medicine for a wound that millions of people are carrying without a name for it. Whatever it is, whatever combination of gifts and wounds and awareness and capability you carry, it is not random. It was not assembled by chance. It was assembled for this moment. The chosen one is not chosen in the abstract. The chosen one is chosen for a specific mission, in a specific era, for reasons that become clearer as the mission is engaged.